Hello everyone, it's Milkbox, and I'm here to bring you a review of Resident Evil Revelations 2. Resident Evil Revelations 2 is the successor to Revelations 1, a series that takes a break from the traditional heavy, action-based style seen in the mainline franchise. It relies more on suspense and conserving ammo. But can the survival horror genre still be done correctly today? Can Revelations 2 still deliver on that concept? Well, yeah. Resident Evil Revelations 2, much like its previous installment, takes on a more TV episode-styled format, dividing up the story between four characters: Claire Redfield, Moira Burton, Barry Burton, and a mysterious girl named Natalia. Players need to use the abilities of the characters to overcome puzzles, find hidden items, and defeat enemies, with some characters being more focused on fighting, where others, like Moira or Natalia, being more focused on finding items in the environment. The gameplay remains mostly the same as Revelations 1, but adds a few new gimmicks, such as the ability to see monsters through walls as Natalia, or blind them with Moira using her handy flashlight. Moira refuses to use guns, but that being said, Moira can use guns in the raid mode, so don't be turned away. I play as Moira. She's fucking awesome. Although Moira quickly establishes herself as her own character, she feels nothing more than paperweight during the game. While she can open chests with a minigame or blind enemies, and sometimes access areas that Claire can't, she isn't good for much else. I often found myself hardly using Moira, as items can still be seen by Claire. Moira can also find hidden drawings that also act as collectibles with a flashlight. Natalia, on the other hand, fills a much greater role. When playing Barry's levels, it's vital to use Natalia's powers to see certain enemies, who otherwise would prove too difficult. Changing characters feels more justified here, and I found myself being more cautious and more strategic in my moves due to her unnatural ability to see enemies. Much like Moira, she can also interact with chests, but these ones are exclusive to her, whereas Moira has her own chests which are exclusive to her. Both characters can still find things in the environment, such as collectibles, but Natalia's collectibles are lava. Both characters can also deal up follow-up attacks to downed enemies, but both don't really appear too useful during gameplay. Gameplay can become quite intense. Both characters can also deal follow-up attacks, but they both don't appear too useful during gameplay, as combat can become too intense to think about changing characters, and most enemies are easy enough to deal with through stunning and melee. Claire and Barry can find and destroy tower emblems littered around the map. These function like shields or emblems from previous games. Puzzles are still a big and interesting part of the game, and some are mandatory, but there are others that exist as optional objectives. Most of the puzzles are pretty interesting and fun to figure out and feel rewarding to do so. The only problem is that there's not enough puzzles in the game, and it would have been better to have included a few more. But that being said, the puzzles we got were pretty good. Both Claire and Barry play the same, and there isn't much of a difference other than Barry has an edge in combat because he starts with more guns. After a chapter is finished, a large upgrade tree is visible, and there really are a lot of skills you can develop. Skill points, or BP, can be used to purchase costumes in the different versions of chapters, such as Invisible Mode, which encourages replayability. Players gain points by avoiding deaths, finishing challenges or trials, finishing the stage quickly, or maintaining a good accuracy. The story takes place before and during the same time as Resident Evil 6, and frequently changes between different times on the island. As a result, depending on who you play as, you will encounter different enemies. Claire and Moira frequently encountered infected who use blunt weapons, and some even use range combat, although you generally see most enemies by Chapter 2, and afterwards the enemies do feel stale and overused. It would have been good to have seen some infected wildlife, other than these weird dog-pig things, just to keep you on your toes. When playing as Barry, the enemies take on a more horror-style look, and the frequent use of Natalia's special ability to see certain enemies really takes an edge in the horror department, as well as adding a gameplay mechanic that isn't seen too often. Although it does follow the same path as Claire and Moira's campaign, and because of this, the enemies do eventually feel too samey because of the short variety. There is a lot of backtracking in the game, and whilst this is a feature associated with Resident Evil in general, it feels new here. Approaching the same area with different enemies in a somewhat different environment with either Barry or Claire does feel good. One area I was in was filled with water, but lacked water in the other's campaign. Although the route taken was much the same, it did feel new, due to the new enemies that roamed, and the advantages they possess in the newly transformed area. Sometimes these new areas can open up parts for guns or collectibles or new weapons, so it's really worth your time to explore these environments and try to find every little thing. Parts for guns work like preset skills, either upping damage, reducing recoil. There's quite a few things. These give a distinct advantage to the player, giving them a reason to explore, to maintain that necessary advantage over the enemy. There are still a lot of combination items in this game, such as herbs, bombs, or items to cure blindness or bleeding. Although given most of these items, the AI characters feel safer and less cumbersome. Another interesting feature is killing enemies with red pus balls on their heads in Claire's campaign, as this will also affect Barry's campaign, effectively dropping this game version of landmines, which will remain there for Barry to accidentally stumble across. Dodge is back, and this time it's the press of a button. Although I was able to dodge pretty well in the last installment, a lot of people did complain that the dodge was too difficult to pull off. People will be happy to know it's a simple press of the button this time round, and can actually be upgraded with more invisibility frames, making for a much more interesting and diverse game experience. The story. The basics involve Claire and Moira being trapped somewhere by a person known as the Overseer. This Overseer has equipped Claire and Moira with bracelets that react if you feel fear, which is a neat twist on the formula. Barry's story takes place after the events of Claire's campaign, as he searches for answers, spouting his usual one-liners and references the original game, which is always good and is funny. The tagline, "Evil is watching," is rather misleading, as I eventually begin to forget the Overseer was watching. The character can only be seen interacting with the environment on a rare occasion, and sometimes talks to the player via the bracelet. It would have been cool to have seen this person interact more by activating traps spontaneously, or maybe using different ways to attack the player outside of set pieces and cutscenes. The game looks visually decent. Claire's facial features look a bit off at times, and some of the textures are quite poor, but other than that, it's rather decent looking. The game does run at 60 FPS, but it does have some frame rate here and there, and screen tearing isn't too much of a problem. It's also on 1080p, but you will not experience 1080p and 60 frames per second on the previous gen, so bear that in mind. Hopefully pulling off 60 FPS will be a staple for the franchise in future installments. Raid mode is a game mode that could be found in Revelations 1. This mode pits you against monsters who can change speed, size, along with a wealth of other things. This keeps things really interesting, and it's nice to know the formula is very much like the last one. With an in-game store, as well as an upgrade system, this mode offers a lot of potential. You can often find yourself visiting maps from previous Resi games, and they still feel familiar to some degree. Unfortunately, we need to wait until March 31st for online co-op, which is a shame due to raid mode clearly being the meat of the game, as it relies more on multiplayer rather than a single player. There are also 2 other modes to offer. These modes fill in areas that the campaign didn't include, and both offer their own unique way of playing. One uses rations as lives, forcing the player to hunt whilst pitted against a clock, whereas the other is stealth-based, where being seen is failure. Both of these modes put you back through areas you previously explored, which is stupidly lazy, but it's still a nice addition. In conclusion, the game is pretty good, but I feel as if 1 was the better game. It should take you between 5 to 7 hours on your first run to finish, but it can go as low as 3 hours if you're more experienced. With 2 endings added to the mix and the amazing raid mod with side bonus content, it will always give you a reason to come back for more. Get it either digitally or retail. The game is pretty cheap, costs around £20 on disc in the UK. Okay guys, that's my first review. I hope you liked it. Remember to subscribe to the Milky's channel for the latest gameplay, commentary and reviews. See, I did tell you I'd do them.